Most animals eat whatever the world puts in front of them. Raw meat, hard roots, bitter leaves, cold and unchanged. Humans did something stranger. Long before cities, writing, or metal tools existed, our ancestors started placing food into fire and waiting for it to become something softer, warmer, and easier than nature had made it. That quiet habit may have changed the body, the daily routine, and the direction of our entire species. But if fire was visible to many animals, why are humans the only ones that actually cook food? For most of life's history on Earth, eating has been a very simple act. An animal finds food and eats it exactly the way the environment provides it. Leaves are eaten as leaves. Flesh is eaten as flesh. Seeds are crushed. Insects are swallowed. Roots are pulled from the soil and chewed. Across forests, grasslands, oceans, and deserts, the pattern is remarkably the same. Food is taken directly from the world and eaten with very little change. This pattern is so widespread that it forms one of the quiet background rules of animal life. The environment produces material, and bodies are built to process it exactly as it appears. In this sense, eating is not just a behavior, but also a relationship between body and landscape. The shape of teeth, the strength of jaws, the length of intestines, and the chemistry of digestion all reflect the kinds of food that animals regularly find around them. A grazing animal spends hours each day breaking down tough plant fibers. A predator tears through muscle and tissue with teeth made for cutting. Many birds swallow seeds whole and rely on internal grinding organs to process them later. Even insects follow similar patterns, eating plant tissue, nectar, or other small animals in forms that closely match their natural state. When you look at the living world from this angle, a simple pattern becomes clear. Bodies are built to match raw environments. The hardness of a nut, the toughness of raw meat, the bitterness of wild leaves, or the tough texture of roots are not obstacles to animals. They are simply the conditions that evolution has shaped physical systems around over long stretches of time. Because of this, animals rarely need to change the structure of food before eating it. Instead, the body itself does the work. Teeth crush, saliva softens, stomach acids dissolve, and microbes help break down whatever is left. These internal processes work like a biological extension of the environment. The transformation of food happens inside the body rather than outside of it. Across millions of years, this arrangement has worked well for nearly every species that walks, swims, or flies. When a deer lowers its head into grass, the plant is not changed before it is eaten. When a wolf catches prey, the flesh is not modified before the wolf bites into it. Even highly intelligent animals follow this pattern. Primates gather fruits and leaves. Birds crack shells. Some animals wash or handle food, but the basic structure of the food stays mostly unchanged. The world presents raw material, and animal bodies are designed to meet it exactly as it is. Seen from a wide evolutionary perspective, this relationship between raw environments and biological digestion seems almost universal. Yet, the human story sits slightly outside this pattern. At some point deep in human history, the relationship between food and body started to shift. Instead of relying entirely on teeth, stomach acids, and long hours of chewing, early humans gradually began to place food near heat. This did not just warm the food. Heat could soften plant fibers, loosen connective tissue, and change the texture of many materials that had previously required intense physical effort to eat. In effect, part of the digestive process moved outside the body and into the surrounding environment. What had once happened only inside stomachs started to happen in the open air, near a controlled fire. This shift is subtle, but unusual when you look across the animal kingdom. Most creatures evolved bodies capable of handling raw food directly. Humans, however, developed a habit that allowed food to be transformed before it ever reached the mouth. This small difference raises a deeper question about the long path of human life. If nearly every animal species relies on bodies built for raw environments, how did one species come to depend on food that had already been changed by heat before the first bite was taken? Across the living world, eating raw food is not a limitation, it's a design principle. Animal bodies have been shaped over enormous stretches of evolutionary time to meet the world exactly as it is. Teeth grind through fibrous plants. Jaws tear through muscle. Stomach acids dissolve tissues, and complex communities of microbes assist in breaking down substances that would otherwise be out of reach. In many species, this work requires long hours every day. A grazing animal may spend much of its waking life chewing and re-chewing plant material. Certain primates devote large portions of their time to gathering and processing fruits, leaves, and stems that need to be chewed carefully before swallowing. Even predators often struggle with tough connective tissues and bones that demand forceful biting and persistent tearing. This pattern reveals something important about the relationship between bodies and environments. Instead of changing food before eating it, animals have evolved bodies capable of doing the transformation internally. The mouth begins the process, the stomach continues it, and the intestines complete it. The body itself works as a moving system of mechanical and chemical processing. In this sense, digestion is the animal kingdom's primary tool for changing food. The transformation happens inside living tissue rather than outside it. When you observe animals in natural environments, you rarely see them trying to reshape food before eating it. A chimpanzee may peel the skin of fruit, a bird may crack open a shell, and some animals rinse or handle food in water. Yet these actions are still relatively small adjustments compared to what heat can do. The basic structure of the food stays raw, muscle fibers stay firm, plant cell walls remain intact, and the chemical makeup of the material is largely unchanged before it enters the digestive system. Because of this, the physical demands of eating raw food are often quite large. Raw plant fibers resist breakdown. Tough animal tissues require repeated chewing. Even foods that look soft may contain compounds that are hard to digest without extended processing inside the body. For many animals, time spent eating is therefore one of the main rhythms of daily life. Hours pass slowly as teeth grind, jaws move, and digestive systems begin their long internal work. The landscape, the body, and the passage of time are closely tied together through this continuous act of processing raw material. When looked at across the broad spectrum of species, this arrangement seems almost universal. Environments present food in one state, and bodies are built to handle that state directly. The physical effort required to eat is accepted as part of existence. In contrast, the human approach to food eventually followed a slightly different path. Instead of relying entirely on the body's mechanical and chemical abilities, humans began to use elements of the environment itself to do some of the work ahead of time. Fire, once controlled and maintained, offered a way to change the physical structure of food before it entered the mouth. Plant fibers could soften, animal tissues could loosen, and many materials could become easier to chew. This meant that some of the effort normally carried out by teeth and stomachs could happen outside the body, in the space around heat. The shift may appear small at first, yet when placed against the background of animal life, it represents a quiet departure from the usual relationship between organism and environment. Instead of evolving bodies capable of handling increasingly tough raw materials, humans gradually developed a habit of altering those materials in advance. The body still digests the food, but the first stage of transformation no longer belongs entirely to biology. It begins out in the world, near fire, before the first bite is ever taken within the long history of life. That simple change raises a deeper puzzle. If the natural design of animal bodies has always been to process raw environments directly, why did one species begin to move part of that process outside the body and into the fire before eating? Seen from a distance, the act of eating raw food seems almost effortless in the animal world. A grazing herd moves slowly across open land, lowering their heads again and again toward the ground. Birds pick seeds from dry soil. Primates search through branches for fruit and leaves. Each species seems comfortable with the materials their environment provides. Yet this apparent ease hides a great deal of biological effort happening inside the body. Raw foods are often structurally complex. Plants are reinforced by strong cell walls built to resist damage. Animal tissues are held together by networks of connective fibers that keep muscles intact. Seeds are protected by hard shells meant to survive harsh conditions before sprouting. These structures evolved to withstand the pressures of nature, and they are not easily broken down or to meet these challenges. Animal bodies developed powerful internal systems. Teeth act as the first mechanical tools. Some animals have white grinding surfaces for crushing plant matter, while others have sharp edges capable of slicing through muscle. Saliva starts softening material and prepares it for digestion. Once swallowed, food enters stomachs filled with acidic fluids capable of dissolving tissues and neutralizing many natural defenses present in plants and animals. Beyond the stomach, long intestinal passages continue the process through chemical reactions and help from microscopic organisms that assist in dismantling complex molecules. This entire sequence forms a biological strategy that has supported animal life for enormous periods of time. The world offers raw materials and bodies transform those materials internally. Because of this, the effort required to consume raw food becomes a central rhythm of daily life. Many animals must dedicate a large portion of their waking hours simply to gathering and processing food with their bodies. Grazing species often move slowly for much of the day while chewing plant fibers that resist quick digestion. Certain primates spend long stretches of time breaking down leaves or tough fruit skins with repeated bites. Even predators may struggle with resistant tendons or bones that require persistent force before swallowing. In these cases, eating is not a brief activity, but a steady physical task. Time passes alongside the repeated motion of jaws and the slow work of digestion. When you consider this pattern across the wider landscape of life, a quiet consistency emerges. Animals adapt themselves to the raw state of the environment rather than altering the environment first. Evolution adjusts bodies over generations so that teeth, stomachs, and intestines match the foods available in surrounding habitats. From this perspective, the boundary between organism and environment stays stable. The world produces food, and bodies respond to it as it appears. The relationship between the two is direct. Within this broad pattern, the human path gradually introduced a different approach. Instead of adjusting only the body to meet the environment, humans began to change certain elements of the environment before eating. Fire, once controlled and maintained, allowed heat to interact with food in ways that softened its structure. Fibrous plants could loosen. Tough animal tissues could become easier to tear apart. Materials that once demanded extended chewing might require less effort after exposure to warmth. When food goes through this kind of change before it reaches the mouth, the balance between body and environment subtly shifts. The digestive process no longer begins entirely inside the body. Some of the transformation happens outside it, in the surrounding space where heat is present. Compared with the long history of raw eating across the animal kingdom, this development is unusual. It suggests that human survival eventually depended not only on biological structures but also on learned interactions with natural forces like fire. Yet even with this difference, the deeper question remains unresolved. Fire has existed in the natural world long before humans appeared. Lightning strikes forests, volcanic landscapes release heat, and many animals have encountered these things throughout history. If heat has always been present in nature, and if many species are capable of learning and manipulating objects in their environment, why did the habit of cooking become a consistent part of human life while remaining almost completely absent among other animals? Across many landscapes of the world, the act of eating is closely tied to the physical structure of food itself. Plants grow with rigid frameworks that help them stand upright toward light. Fibers run through stems and leaves, forming networks that resist tearing. Animal bodies contain muscles bound together by connective tissues that provide strength and flexibility. These structures are essential for life, yet they also create obstacles for any creature attempting to eat them. Raw food is rarely soft by design. It is built to survive in nature, not to dissolve easily in the mouth of another organism. Because of this, animals that depend on raw diets must rely on bodies capable of meeting these structural challenges directly. Teeth are the first tools. In this interaction, some species have flat surfaces suited for crushing seeds and grinding plants into smaller fragments. Others carry pointed teeth that puncture skin and slice through muscle fibers. The shapes of these teeth vary widely across species, yet they all serve the same purpose: to reduce the physical strength of raw materials before they travel deeper into the digestive system. The jaw, moving rhythmically over long periods of time, becomes a central instrument in this process. In many animals, the movement of chewing continues for hours each day, slowly breaking down materials that resist quick consumption. Once swallowed, food encounters a second stage of transformation. The stomach provides a chemical environment capable of dissolving tissues and weakening structures that survive the work of the teeth. Acids and enzymes interact with the food, gradually separating complex molecules into simpler forms that the body can absorb. In some species, specialized digestive chambers house communities of microorganisms that assist in dismantling plant fibers or other resistant substances. These internal systems work together as a living laboratory where raw materials are slowly converted into usable energy. From this perspective, digestion can be understood as a biological strategy for dealing with the hardness and complexity of the natural world. The environment produces structures designed for survival, and animal bodies evolve the capacity to break those structures apart from within. This arrangement has shaped daily rhythms across countless species. Animals must dedicate time and energy to gathering food and then processing it internally through chewing, digestion, and absorption. The act of eating becomes tied to movement, rest, and the gradual passage of the day. Many grazing animals walk slowly while feeding, their jaws moving steadily as they process large quantities of plant matter. Certain primates sit quietly while chewing leaves or fruits that demand careful breakdown before swallowing. Even predators, after catching prey, may spend considerable time tearing through tough tissues before their stomachs begin the longer chemical work of digestion. In each of these cases, the body performs nearly all of the transformation required to make raw materials usable. Against this broad biological background, the human relationship with food gradually followed a somewhat different direction. Humans did not entirely abandon the internal processes shared by other animals. Teeth still chew, and stomach acids still dissolve tissues. Yet, humans also developed the habit of exposing food to heat before eating it. When food encounters sustained warmth, many of the structures that once resisted digestion begin to loosen. Plant fibers can soften, and connective tissues within animal meat may weaken. These changes alter the texture of the food before it reaches the mouth. Instead of confronting the full strength of raw materials, the body receives substances that have already gone through a stage of transformation outside the digestive system. In this sense, cooking shifts a portion of the digestive effort away from the body and into the surrounding environment. Heat becomes an external partner in preparing food for consumption, compared with the long-standing pattern of raw diets across the animal kingdom. This adjustment represents a notable departure from the usual biological arrangement. The body no longer carries the entire burden of breaking down natural structures. Some of that work happens before eating even begins. Observing this difference raises an important curiosity about the human story. If most animals rely entirely on their internal systems to overcome the structural challenges of raw food, what conditions allowed humans to move part of that process outside the body and into the fire that warmed their surroundings? Among animals, the raw diet is not only common, it also shapes the scale and pace of everyday life. When food remains hard, fibrous, resistant, or chemically demanding, the body must respond with time. This is one of the quiet costs of eating in the natural state. A creature may survive perfectly well on raw food, but survival often requires hours of chewing, long digestive passages, or specialized internal systems that continue working long after the meal has been swallowed. In this way, diet does not only shape anatomy, it also shapes the rhythm of the day. A large grazing animal may spend much of its waking life with its head lowered, collecting plant matter in slow repetition. The food may seem abundant, yet each mouthful contains structural barriers that require patience. Grass is rich in fiber, but that fiber is hard to access quickly. Leaves may be everywhere, but their tissues are built to hold form, resist damage, and keep living under sun and wind. Even fruits, which seem softer and easier, often carry skins, seeds, or chemical defenses that limit how simply they can be consumed. Predators live under a different set of conditions, yet they also face the raw state of nature directly. Flesh is softer than wood or leaf fiber, but it is still part of a body built for strength. Muscle is held together by connective tissue. Skin resists tearing, tendons stretch and bind, bones protect and support. A successful hunt may look sudden, but eating the animal is another matter. The body of the predator must cut, tear, crush, and swallow materials that were not made to come apart easily. Once the meal enters the stomach, acids and enzymes continue, a task that teeth alone cannot finish. This long internal labor is one of the central facts of raw diets across the animal kingdom. The world offers food in forms shaped for life, and other creatures must adapt themselves to those forms rather than changing them first. From this perspective, the natural condition of food is not softness or convenience. It is structure. It is resistance. It is matter still carrying the design of the plant or animal it once belonged to. That is why so much biological energy must be spent on chewing, digesting, fermenting, and absorbing. The body becomes the place where hardness is slowly turned into nourishment. This helps explain why so many animals are defined by digestive specialization. Some carry multiple stomach chambers. Some depend heavily on gut microbes. Some must eat almost continuously. The raw diet does not merely fill the body. It organizes the body. It shapes the jaw, the teeth, the stomach, the intestine, and the daily timetable of survival. Against that deep background, the human relationship with food begins to look unusual in a more specific way. Cooking is not merely about taste. It is not simply a cultural decoration added to an otherwise ordinary meal. It changes the timing of labor between food and body. When heat softens a root, weakens plant tissue, or loosens the structure of meat, some of the work that would normally be done by the jaw and stomach has already begun before eating starts. In other words, cooking changes where the effort happens. Instead of placing nearly all of the burden inside the digestive system, humans can move part of that burden into the surrounding environment. Fire becomes a place where the structure of food starts to yield. This does not remove digestion, but it changes its starting point. Compared with the rest of animal life, that is a remarkable shift. It suggests that humans did not simply inherit a diet from nature and meet it with anatomy alone. They gradually created a new relationship between food, time, and biological effort. And once that relationship appeared, it may have affected not only what humans ate, but how long they had to eat, how much effort they needed to spend, and how the body itself adapted across generations. If raw food had always demanded so much time and internal labor from living creatures, what happened when one species found a way to begin that labor outside the body in the quiet heat of fire? In the natural world, raw food places quiet but persistent demands on the body. These demands are not always obvious at first glance. A plant may feel soft when held in the hand, and fresh meat may seem easy to bite into. Yet beneath these surfaces lie structures that evolve to resist damage, maintain stability, and survive the pressures of the environment. Plant tissues are reinforced by rigid cell walls that help stems stand upright, and leaves hold their shape under wind and sun. Inside animal bodies, muscles are woven together with fibers that allow movement while preserving strength. These structural features are essential for life, but they also mean that raw food often arrives in forms that resist rapid digestion for animals that rely entirely on raw diets. The body must solve this problem through physical and chemical effort. Teeth break the first barrier by reducing food into smaller fragments. In species that consume plants, wide grinding surfaces press repeatedly against the fibers, slowly weakening them with each movement of the jaw. In species that consume other animals, sharper teeth cut and tear through tissue that holds muscle and skin together. This process is rarely quick. Even foods that eventually become easy to swallow may require extended chewing before they can safely enter the digestive system. The mouth, therefore, acts as the first stage of mechanical processing, converting large and resistant materials into forms that the stomach can handle more effectively. Once food moves deeper into the body, a second stage begins. The stomach introduces acids and enzymes capable of dissolving proteins and weakening other complex structures. The environment inside the stomach is carefully balanced so that tissues break down while the body itself remains protected. After this stage, partially digested material continues through the intestines where additional enzymes and microbial partners assist in extracting energy and nutrients. In many animals, this internal system is long and elaborate because raw food requires time and space for full digestion. Plant fibers may resist chemical breakdown and must be fermented by microorganisms that specialize in dismantling them. Proteins and fats must be separated into smaller components before they can pass through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. These processes happen quietly and slowly, often continuing long after the visible act of eating has ended. For this reason, the structure of an animal's digestive system often reveals the nature of its diet. Species that rely heavily on plants frequently have long digestive tracts or specialized chambers where microbes help break down cellulose. Species that consume meat may have shorter digestive systems, but stronger stomach acids capable of dissolving animal tissues more quickly. In both cases, the body itself carries the responsibility of transforming raw matter into usable nourishment. Evolution adjusts anatomy over many generations so that internal systems match the demands of the surrounding environment. This arrangement, repeated across countless species, represents the usual solution to the challenge of eating. The world offers food in forms shaped by nature, and the body evolves to overcome those forms through chewing, digestion, and chemical breakdown. When placed within this broader biological context, the human relationship with food appears unusual. Humans still have teeth, stomach acids, and digestive enzymes similar to those found in other mammals. Yet, humans also regularly expose food to heat before eating it. Heat can soften plant cell walls, weaken connective tissues in meat, and alter the texture of many foods that would otherwise demand extensive chewing. This means that some of the structural barriers normally confronted by the mouth and stomach may already be reduced before the first bite is taken. As a result, cooking subtly redistributes the work of digestion. Instead of beginning entirely inside the body, part of the transformation begins outside it in the warmth of fire. Seen against the long history of raw diets in the animal kingdom, this shift raises an intriguing question. If the bodies of animals evolved to manage raw food through internal systems alone, what does it mean for a species to begin changing the structure of food before the body ever touches it? The body of an animal reveals a lot about the kind of food it must confront in the environment. Teeth, jaws, stomach chemistry, and the length of the digestive tract are not random features. They are slowly shaped through generations so that each species can handle the materials available around it. When the food is tough, bodies evolve strength and endurance. When the food is difficult to break down chemically, digestive systems grow more complex. In this way, anatomy becomes a record of the long relationship between living organisms and the raw world that feeds them. Among mammals that rely heavily on plants, the demands of raw food are especially clear. Plant tissues contain cellulose, a substance that provides structural support, but is resistant to digestion by many animals. To overcome this barrier, some species have developed digestive chambers where microorganisms help dismantle plant fibers. These microbes perform chemical work that the animal's own enzymes cannot easily complete. The result is a slow collaboration between body and microbial life, turning hard plant structures into energy over extended periods of time. Other plant-eating animals follow a different path. Instead of relying primarily on internal fermentation, they depend on constant chewing. Their jaws move in steady, repeated motions that grind plant matter into smaller fragments, gradually weakening the fibers that hold the material together. This mechanical effort often occupies large portions of the day. The animal continues chewing, not only while eating, but sometimes long after the meal has been gathered, allowing the digestive system to work more effectively on the reduced material. Predators face a different challenge. Yet, their bodies also reveal adaptation to raw food. Meat contains dense networks of muscle fibers and connective tissues that resist quick breakdown. Carnivorous mammals often have sharp teeth capable of slicing through flesh and separating tissues from bone. Their stomach acids tend to be strong enough to dissolve animal proteins and weaken structures that survive the work of the teeth. The digestive tract may be shorter than that of plant eaters, yet it remains highly specialized for processing the materials found in prey. These examples illustrate a general principle across the animal kingdom. When food arrives in a raw state, evolution modifies the body so that the organism can deal with it directly. Teeth become tools for grinding or cutting. Digestive organs become environments where chemical reactions slowly dismantle complex structures. Microbial partners develop inside the body to assist in breaking down materials that would otherwise resist digestion. Over time, the body itself becomes the place where the transformation of food takes place. The natural state of eating, therefore, is not merely about swallowing food. It involves a long chain of physical and chemical work performed within living tissue. The environment presents food in forms shaped by survival, and organisms adapt themselves to handle those forms without altering them beforehand. In this sense, the digestive system functions as the animal kingdom's primary technology for dealing with the complexity of raw matter. When considering humans within this larger biological pattern, a subtle tension appears. Human anatomy still carries many features common to other mammals. The teeth can chew, the stomach produces acids, and the intestines absorb nutrients in familiar ways. Yet, the human body does not appear to rely as heavily on the extreme adaptations seen in some other species that live entirely on raw diets. Human teeth are smaller than those of many primates that depend heavily on tough plant materials. The digestive tract is not as specialized for fermentation as that of certain plant-eating mammals. These observations don't provide a complete answer, but they hint at an interesting possibility. Instead of evolving ever more powerful internal systems to confront raw food directly, humans may have gradually relied on a different strategy. If heat could soften fibers, loosen tissues, and make food easier to break apart, then the body would not need to carry the entire burden of processing raw materials alone. Cooking could begin part of the digestive work before the food entered the mouth. When viewed in this light, cooking does not simply modify food. It may also alter the evolutionary pressures placed on the human body itself. If some of the difficulty of raw food is removed by heat, the anatomy of the eater may slowly reflect the change over time. This possibility leads naturally to another question about the human body. If cooking became part of the human relationship with food, how might that habit have influenced the shape and structure of the body that depends on it? The human body carries quiet traces of the long relationship between food and survival. Teeth, jaws, and the digestive tract all reveal something about the kinds of materials a species has regularly consumed. When these structures are compared across mammals, a pattern begins to emerge. Animals that depend heavily on tough plant fibers often have large, grinding teeth and powerful jaws capable of enduring repeated chewing. Their digestive systems may include complex chambers where microorganisms help dismantle cellulose, allowing energy to be extracted from materials that would otherwise pass through the body unchanged. In contrast, animals that rely primarily on meat tend to have sharp teeth designed for cutting and tearing, along with digestive systems suited to breaking down animal proteins and fats. Each body reflects the demands of its diet. Against this background, the human body appears somewhat unusual. Human teeth are neither specialized for constant grinding of fibrous plants nor sharply adapted for tearing through raw flesh. The jaw muscles are relatively moderate in strength compared with some other primates. The digestive tract also occupies a middle ground, lacking the extensive fermentation chambers seen in certain plant-eating mammals while still maintaining the chemical tools needed to process a wide variety of foods. This combination suggests a body that is flexible rather than strongly specialized for one particular raw diet. Such flexibility has long been an advantage for humans living in changing environments. Early human communities likely encountered many different food sources depending on climate, landscape, and season. Roots, fruits, leaves, seeds, insects, and animal tissues could all appear in varying amounts. A body capable of digesting many types of food would have been valuable in such conditions. Yet flexibility alone does not remove the physical challenges of raw materials. Tough plant tissues still resist chewing. Connective tissues in meat still demand effort from teeth and stomach acids. If early humans relied entirely on raw food, the body would still face the same structural barriers that shape the diets of other animals. This is where the presence of controlled fire introduces an intriguing shift. Heat has the ability to alter the physical structure of many foods before they enter the body. Plant cell walls may soften when exposed to sustained warmth. Starches can change in ways that make them easier to digest. The connective tissues that hold muscles together may loosen, allowing meat to separate more readily under the pressure of teeth. None of these changes eliminate the need for digestion, but they can reduce the effort required at the earliest stages of eating. The mouth encounters food that has already begun to yield dot in this sense. Cooking begins the transformation of food outside the body. The digestive system still performs its essential work. Yet, the first barriers presented by raw structures may be partially lowered. Over time, this shift could influence how the human body interacts with its diet. If food regularly arrives in a softened or altered form, the evolutionary pressure to develop extremely powerful chewing muscles or highly specialized digestive chambers may be reduced. The body may remain capable of processing raw materials when necessary, but it may no longer need to carry the full burden of that task alone. This idea does not imply a single moment when humans suddenly change their biology. Evolution moves slowly across many generations. Habits form gradually, environments shift, and bodies adapt over long periods of time. Yet the regular use of heat to prepare food could create subtle differences in how the human body balances the work of digestion between internal biology and external preparation. When viewed within the broader context of the animal kingdom, this possibility becomes particularly interesting. Most animals rely entirely on their anatomy to overcome the challenges of raw food. Humans, by contrast, may have developed a habit that allowed part of that challenge to be addressed before eating even began. If cooking could alter the balance between body and environment in this way, the next question becomes hard to ignore. At what point in human history did fire become a consistent presence in daily life? And how did people first learn to keep it close enough to food that heat could quietly begin the work of digestion? Long before cities, metal tools, or written language appeared, fire was already present in the natural world. Lightning strikes could ignite dry grasslands. Forests sometimes burned during long stretches without rain. In volcanic landscapes, heat could escape from the earth itself. These events were unpredictable and often destructive. Yet, they were also part of the natural environment encountered by many animals. Fire was not something humans invented. It existed long before the human lineage appeared. What changed in the human story was not the existence of fire, but the gradual ability to stay near it, observe it, and eventually maintain it. In the early stages of human history, Fire was likely encountered as a natural event rather than a control tool. A wildfire might pass through a landscape, leaving behind charred ground and smoldering wood. After the flames faded, warmth could linger in the remaining embers. For a group of early humans moving through such an environment, these glowing remains would have been hard to ignore. Heat radiates into the surrounding air. Light extends into the darkness. The smell of burned vegetation and animals spreads through the landscape. These sensory signals make fire one of the most noticeable events in nature. Unlike many other environmental forces, fire changes the atmosphere around it in ways that are visible, audible, and warm to the skin. Even without understanding its full behavior, early humans could observe its effects. The ground becomes cleared of dense vegetation. Some animals flee the flames while others remain behind, unable to escape. Plant structures weaken under heat, and certain materials soften as they burn or smolder. None of these observations require a complex explanation. They are direct experiences available to any creature that encounters a burnt landscape. For animals moving through such areas, the changes produced by fire may have briefly altered the availability and condition of food. Plants damaged by heat could become softer. Insects might gather around charred wood. The bodies of animals caught in fire might be found in ordered states compared with freshly killed prey. These conditions would not have occurred regularly, yet they could appear often enough across generations to become familiar features of certain environments. For humans, whose survival depended on careful attention to surroundings, such changes may have held particular interest over time. The presence of fire in natural landscapes could shift from being a purely destructive event to something that was cautiously approached and observed. At some point in this long history, early humans began to do more than simply encounter fire after lightning or volcanic activity. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that human groups eventually learned to preserve small flames or glowing embers for extended periods. Instead of waiting for the next natural wildfire, they could carry fire with them or maintain it within a specific location. This step represents a profound change in the relationship between humans and a natural force. Fire was no longer just an event. It became a presence that could remain within a camp or gathering place. Maintaining fire required attention. Fuel had to be added. Embers had to be protected from wind and rain. The flame had to be kept alive through the night. These activities transformed fire from a temporary occurrence into something woven into the rhythms of daily life. Warmth could be extended beyond the moment of a passing wildfire. Light could reach into the darkness after sunset. The space around a fire became a point where people gathered, rested, and interacted. Yet even at this stage, fire did not automatically mean cooking. The earliest importance of fire may have been warmth, protection, and light rather than the preparation of food. When fire became a steady presence in human environments, it created new possibilities that had not existed before. Heat was now available not only during rare natural events, but during ordinary moments of life. Once fire could be maintained intentionally, its influence on human behavior began to expand. The warmth of flames and embers could touch many aspects of daily activity. Among those possibilities, one stands out as particularly significant for the human relationship with food. When heat stays nearby for long periods of time, the materials placed close to it cannot remain unchanged. The structure of food begins to respond to the warmth of fire long before it reaches the mouth. If humans learn to keep fire alive within their living spaces, how did that steady presence of heat begin to influence the way food was handled, prepared, and eventually eaten? Fire changes the environment in ways that few other natural forces can. When flames pass through a landscape, they leave behind more than charred wood and darkened soil. The air becomes warmer, the ground becomes open, and many materials that once held their structure begin to soften or break apart. Plants that once stood firm may collapse under heat. Insects emerge from damaged bark. The bodies of animals that did not escape the flames may lie altered by the warmth that passed over them. These changes are temporary, yet they create moments in which the structure of the natural world becomes different from what it was before. For creatures moving through such landscapes, the results of fire are visible long after the flames disappear. A burned field or forest is not silent. The ground carries the smell of smoke. The surface of wood may still hold warmth. Ash settles lightly over the soil, and new spaces appear where dense vegetation once stood. Such places might attract attention simply because they differ from the surrounding landscape. In these spaces, the condition of plants and animals is no longer the same as it was before the fire passed through. Materials that were once rigid may become brittle. Tissues that were once firm may soften. These transformations don't require deliberate action. They happen naturally when heat interacts with organic matter. For a long period of human history, encounters with fire were likely limited to these kinds of events. Lightning could ignite dry vegetation during storms, and volcanic activity could release heat from the earth. Flames would appear suddenly and disappear once their fuel was consumed. Humans living in these environments could observe the effects of fire, but had little control over when or where it occurred. The heat would come and go according to the rhythms of weather and landscape. Yet, repeated encounters with these events could slowly build familiarity. When a burned landscape revealed animals whose bodies had changed under heat, or plants whose structures had softened, the difference between raw and heated material would become visible. Even without intention, the contrast between the two states could be noticed. Raw tissues resist the teeth in one way, while tissues exposed to warmth may yield differently under pressure. Such observations don't require complex knowledge. They arise simply from experience with the environment over many generations. The ability to remain near fire gradually changed this relationship. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups eventually learn not only to approach fire, but also to keep it alive beyond the moment of a natural blaze. A small flame or a cluster of glowing embers could be preserved and protected. Dry branches or plant materials could be added to sustain the heat. When fire was maintained in this way, it stopped being a brief event and became a lasting feature of a living space. This development transformed the human environment in subtle but important ways. A fire that continues burning through the evening produces steady warmth. It casts light that reaches beyond fading daylight. It creates a central place where people can remain during the cooler hours of night. The area around the fire becomes calmer and more predictable than the dark spaces beyond it. These conditions encourage people to gather in one place for longer periods of time. When fire remains present in daily life, it inevitably begins to interact with the materials that surround it. Wood dries and cracks in the warmth. Water warms in containers placed nearby. Plant materials left close to the flame slowly change in texture. If pieces of food come near the heat, they cannot remain exactly as they were before. Even without deliberate planning, warmth alters the structure of organic matter. Fibers loosen, moisture evaporates, and tissues begin to transform. The presence of a controlled fire therefore creates a new possibility in the relationship between humans and food. Instead of encountering heat only in rare natural events, humans could now experience its effects whenever a flame was maintained nearby. The environment around the fire became a place where the state of food could change before it was eaten, when heat remained within the living space of early humans. How did that quiet and steady warmth begin to influence the way food was treated, shared, and eventually prepared for the first bite? When fire began to remain within human living spaces, the environment around it quietly changed. A steady flame creates a small circle of warmth that stands apart from the cooler air beyond it. Light reaches into the darkness after the sun has disappeared, revealing faces, tools, and the ground beneath one's feet. Wood placed near the fire dries and cracks. Moist materials slowly release vapor into the air. The ground close to the flames becomes a place where heat lingers even after the fire itself settles into glowing embers. These changes may seem simple, yet they alter the rhythm of daily life in ways that few other natural forces can. For early human communities, the ability to remain near fire meant that certain activities could continue beyond daylight. Darkness no longer forced an immediate retreat into stillness. The glow of embers created a space where people could gather, rest, and remain aware of their surroundings. In such conditions, the fire became more than a source of warmth. It became a center around which people organized their presence in the landscape. The ground near the fire offered visibility and comfort, while the shadows beyond it remained uncertain and cold. Over time, this small circle of warmth and light may have encouraged repeated patterns of gathering. People would return to the same place where embers were preserved and flames could be rekindled. Fuel had to be collected, branches arranged, and ashes cleared. These simple actions formed routines that connected human attention with the maintenance of fire. In this way, fire slowly shifted from a rare environmental event to a familiar companion within the human environment. Whenever a flame remains present for long periods, the objects placed nearby inevitably respond to heat. Stones warm slowly in the firelight. Water held in containers becomes warmer as it rests near the embers. Plant materials dry and change texture as moisture escapes. These transformations happen without intention. Heat moves outward from the flame and interacts with whatever lies within its reach. Food, when brought close to that warmth, cannot remain unchanged. Pieces of plant matter placed near a fire begin to soften as their internal structures respond to heat. Fibers that once held firm gradually loosen. Animal tissues exposed to warmth can separate more easily when pressed between the teeth. The difference may first appear subtle, but the change in texture becomes noticeable through touch and chewing. The body encounters food that yields more readily than it would in its raw state. These observations don't require deliberate experimentation. They emerge naturally whenever heat and organic material share the same space. If early humans spent long evenings gathered around a fire, the presence of warmth would inevitably influence the condition of the things brought near it. Food collected during the day might rest beside the flames as people sat and spoke. Over time, repeated exposure to heat could reveal that certain foods became easier to chew after being warmed. The structure of the food itself would quietly communicate this difference. In this sense, cooking may not have begun as a sudden invention. It may have emerged gradually from simple interactions between heat, food, and the repeated human habit of gathering around fire. As flames and embers remained present in everyday life, they created an environment where the transformation of food could happen naturally within reach of the human hand. Once this possibility appeared, the relationship between fire and food could begin to deepen. If warmth softened materials and made them easier to chew, and placing food intentionally closer to heat might slowly become part of ordinary practice. The quiet presence of fire would then influence not only comfort and light, but also the way people approached the act of eating itself. When heat began to touch food regularly in human living spaces, what kinds of changes did it produce in the structure of the food before the first bite was ever taken? Heat has a quiet but powerful effect on the structure of food. When organic materials are exposed to warmth, the internal arrangements that give them strength begin to shift. These changes are not dramatic explosions or sudden transformations. They occur gradually, often invisible at first. Yet they alter the way food responds to pressure from teeth and the chemistry of digestion inside the body. Understanding this process begins with the structure of plants. Much of the firmness found in roots, stems, and leaves comes from microscopic walls that surround plant cells. These walls are built from strong compounds that allow plants to stand upright, resist wind, and maintain shape while growing towards sunlight. For animals that eat plants in their raw state, these structures present a mechanical challenge. Teeth must grind repeatedly to break them apart, and digestive systems must rely on chemical reactions and microbial partners to dismantle what chewing cannot fully destroy. When heat enters this process, the structure of plant tissue begins to change. Warmth weakens the rigid networks that hold cell walls together. Moisture trapped within the plant expands and moves, causing the tissue to soften. Fibers that once resisted pressure may begin to separate, allowing the material to yield more easily when bitten or chewed. These changes do not remove the plant's nutritional content. Instead, they alter the physical barriers that once protected it. As those barriers loosen, the body can reach the stored energy inside the plant more easily. Similar processes occur within animal tissues. Muscle is made up of long fibers held together by networks of connective material. These fibers give living animals the strength to move and support their bodies. In raw meat, the same structures that allow movement also resist quick breakdown during eating. Teeth must work to tear the fibers apart, and digestion must continue dismantling the tissues after swallowing. Heat changes the behavior of these structures as well. When exposed to warmth, proteins inside muscle fibers begin to shift their arrangement. Connective tissues that once held the fibers tightly together gradually weaken. The result is a texture that separates more readily when pressed or bitten. This is why meat exposed to sustained heat often becomes easier to chew than the same tissue in its raw condition. These transformations occur through natural interactions between temperature and biological materials. No special tools are required beyond the presence of warmth itself. When food rests near fire, the energy from heat moves slowly into the material. The molecules that form plant fibers and animal proteins respond to that energy by changing the way they hold together. As a result, the physical effort required to break apart the food may decrease before it ever reaches the mouth. In this sense, heat performs part of the work that teeth and stomach acids would otherwise need to complete from a biological perspective. This shift is significant. The body remains responsible for digestion, but the starting condition of the food has already been altered. Plant tissues that once resisted chewing may become softer. Animal fibers that once demanded tearing may begin to separate more easily. These changes influence how much effort the body must invest in processing a meal. When viewed against the long history of raw diets in the animal kingdom, the presence of heat introduces a different pathway through which food becomes accessible to the body. Instead of relying solely on anatomical strength and chemical digestion, humans could allow the environment itself to begin weakening the structures that once resisted consumption over time. This simple interaction between heat and food could reshape the relationship between the eater and the material being eaten. If warmth could quietly soften the barriers that once protected the energy inside plants and animals, how might that change the amount of work required from the human body during the act of eating? Heat does more than soften the outer structure of food. It also influences how the body later interacts with the material during digestion. When raw food enters the mouth, the body begins a process that must overcome many layers of physical and chemical resistance. Fibers must be broken, proteins must be unfolded, and stored energy must be separated from the structures that once protected it. This work normally takes time and effort, and in many animals, the digestive system has evolved to manage these challenges slowly and steadily when food is exposed to heat before eating. Some of these early barriers begin to weaken. In plant foods, warmth can cause certain internal compounds to absorb water and expand. Structures that once held tightly together may loosen, allowing the food to break apart more easily when pressure is applied. This does not mean the plant loses its nutrients. Instead, the energy stored within the plant becomes more accessible because the surrounding structures are no longer as resistant. In animal tissues, heat affects the proteins that form muscle and connective material. Proteins are long chains of molecules folded into specific shapes. These shapes give tissues their strength and flexibility while the animal is alive. When exposed to heat, the arrangement of these molecules begins to change. The tightly folded structures can loosen and unfold, which alters the texture of the tissue. This change allows muscle fibers to separate more easily, making the material less resistant to chewing and digestion. The result of these changes is not simply softer food. It is food that has already begun to move through a stage of transformation before it enters the body. Teeth still perform their mechanical role, and the stomach still carries out chemical digestion. Yet the starting point of the process has shifted. Instead of confronting fully intact raw structures, the body receives materials that have already been partially altered by temperature. This adjustment can influence the amount of effort required from the mouth and digestive system. If plant fibers have loosened and animal tissues have weakened, the force needed to break them apart may decrease. The stomach may encounter proteins that are already unfolded and therefore easier to break down chemically. Digestion still occurs, but the path toward releasing energy becomes less physically demanding at the beginning of the process. From an evolutionary perspective, this shift may hold particular significance. In the natural world, energy is one of the most important resources any organism must secure. Every movement, every heartbeat, and every thought depends on the body's ability to obtain energy from food. If a method exists that allows the body to access that energy with less effort, the consequences may reach far beyond a single meal. Over long periods of time, changes in how energy is obtained can influence the balance between feeding effort and other activities. Cooking, by altering the structure of food before digestion begins, introduces such a possibility. It allows part of the work required to unlock energy to occur outside the body through the simple presence of heat. When heat begins the transformation of food in this way, the relationship between eater and environment changes slightly. Fire becomes more than a source of warmth or light. It becomes a place where the physical barriers surrounding nutrients can begin to yield before the act of eating even starts. Over time, this subtle shift could influence how much time is spent chewing, how efficiently energy is absorbed, and how the body allocates effort between digestion and other functions. Yet, even with these possibilities, an important question remains. If heat can alter the structure of food and make certain nutrients easier to reach, what evidence exists in the traces of ancient human life that this process truly became part of everyday behavior? Heat not only alters the texture of food, it also changes how the body encounters the energy stored inside it. In the natural state of many plants and animals, nutrients are protected by structures that evolved for survival rather than for consumption. Seeds carry strong outer layers designed to shield the embryo within. Plant tissues contain fibers that help stems and leaves resist damage from wind or grazing. Animal muscles are bound together by connective materials that allow movement while preserving strength. These protective features are essential for life in the wild. Yet they also make raw food difficult to process quickly. when food is eaten without any prior transformation. The body must work through these barriers step by step. Teeth grind or tear the material into smaller pieces. Saliva begins the first chemical interactions. The stomach introduces acids that weaken proteins and other compounds. Digestion then continues through the intestines, where enzymes and microorganisms help extract nutrients from the remaining fragments. This chain of events is effective, but it requires time and energy. In animals that rely completely on raw diets, digestion often continues long after the meal itself has ended. Heat changes the beginning of this sequence. When food is exposed to sustained warmth, certain barriers that protect nutrients begin to break down before the food ever reaches the mouth. Plant cell walls soften as their rigid structures weaken under temperature. Starches inside many plants absorb water and change form, allowing digestive enzymes to reach them more easily later. In animal tissues, the proteins that give muscle its firmness begin to unfold and lose some of their original strength. These changes alter the way food behaves under pressure and during digestion. Instead of confronting tightly organized structures, the body receives materials whose internal arrangements have already shifted. As a result, chewing may require less force and digestive enzymes may reach nutrients with fewer obstacles. The transformation caused by heat does not replace digestion, but it can shorten the distance between food and the energy stored within it. From the perspective of biology, this difference is subtle but meaningful. The digestive system is designed to extract energy from complex structures, yet those structures normally resist rapid breakdown. If heat reduces that resistance before the food enters the body, the work required to release nutrients may change over many meals and many generations. Even small changes in how energy becomes available could influence the balance between feeding effort and other biological demands. The presence of heat, therefore, introduces a new step in the relationship between food and the body. In most animals, the environment provides raw materials, and the body performs all of the transformation internally. In humans who cook food, part of that transformation occurs before the first bite. The fire begins the process that teeth and stomach acids will later continue. This shift moves a portion of the digestive effort into the surrounding environment, where warmth quietly alters the structure of food over time. When seen across the long history of animal life, this arrangement is unusual. It suggests that humans do not rely solely on anatomy to deal with the challenges of raw food. Instead, they interact with natural forces such as heat to change those challenges before eating begins. The body still digests, but the starting condition of the meal is no longer entirely raw. As heat reshapes the barriers around nutrients, the relationship between human bodies and the foods they consume begins to follow a slightly different path from that of other animals. Yet, understanding this biological change raises another question that moves beyond the chemistry of food itself. If cooking can alter the structure of plants and animal tissues in ways that influence digestion, what traces of this practice remain in the material evidence left behind by early human communities? The story of cooking does not appear only in the structure of food or in the biology of digestion. It also leaves traces in the material remains of ancient human life. Long after fires have burned out and meals have been eaten, certain marks can remain in the ground, in stone, and in the fragments of plants and animals that once passed through human hands. These traces form part of the evidence that researchers study when trying to understand how early humans interacted with fire and food, unlike bones or stone tools. The direct evidence of cooking can be difficult to preserve. Organic materials break down over time, and the heat that transforms food may also destroy delicate structures that would otherwise survive in the archaeological record. Even so, repeated human use of fire leaves recognizable signs. Ash layers accumulate in places where flames burned again and again. Charred fragments of wood remain embedded in soil long after the fire itself has vanished. Stones placed near heat sometimes crack or change color under repeated exposure to high temperatures. These patterns allow archaeologists to recognize places where fires were maintained by human activity, rather than by brief natural events. In some ancient sites, the ground reveals circular or concentrated areas where burning occurred many times in the same location. Such patterns suggest that fires were not simply passing through the landscape, but were being kept alive within spaces where people gathered. These areas are often interpreted as hearths, places where fire was intentionally maintained for warmth, light, and other activities. The presence of a hearth indicates that fire had become part of daily life rather than an occasional encounter with a natural blaze. Around these hearths, Researchers sometimes find fragments of animal bones that show signs of exposure to heat. The surfaces of these bones may appear darkened, cracked, or altered in ways that suggest contact with flames or embers. Similarly, plant remains recovered from archaeological sites can sometimes show evidence of charring. Seeds, grains, or pieces of plant tissue may survive in a carbonized state that preserves their shape, even though their original organic material has changed. These discoveries do not always prove exactly how food was prepared. A bone that has been burned might have fallen into a fire after the meal was finished, or a plant could have been accidentally charred while lying near the flames. Archaeological evidence must therefore be interpreted carefully. Researchers often rely on patterns rather than single objects. When burned bones, charred plant remains, and hearth structures appear together in the same location, the combination suggests repeated interactions between fire and food over time. These patterns form a picture of how early human communities used fire within their living spaces. The evidence indicates that fire was not simply present, but actively maintained in places where people gathered. Within those spaces, materials connected to food appear close to the areas where heat was strongest. This arrangement suggests that the transformation of food through heat may have become part of everyday activity rather than an occasional accident. The archaeological record does not always reveal the exact moment when cooking began. Human history stretches across enormous spans of time, and the traces left behind are often incomplete. Yet, the repeated appearance of hearths, burnt bones, and charred plant remains provides clues that the relationship between fire and food gradually deepened as human societies developed. In these quiet marks left in soil and stone, researchers find the beginnings of a story that links the warmth of ancient fires to the way humans learned to interact with the food they gathered and hunted. If the material remains of ancient campsites suggest that food and fire often appeared side by side. What might this reveal about the daily routines of the people who once gathered around those early hearths? When archaeologists study ancient campsites, they rarely find a complete picture of daily life preserved in the ground. Time removes many details. Wood decays, plant tissues disappear, and the soft materials of human activity fade away. What remains are fragments, pieces of bone, traces of ash, scattered stones that once surrounded heat, and darkened layers of soil that suggest repeated burning in the same place. These fragments may seem small, yet when they appear together in consistent patterns, they begin to reveal how early humans organized their lives around fire. One of the most important signs of sustained fire use is the presence of a hearth. A hearth is not simply a place where something once burned. It is a location where fire appears to have been kept intentionally and repeatedly. In archaeological sites, hearths often show layers of ash, charcoal, and burnt earth that build up over time. The ground beneath them sometimes becomes hardened or discolored from long exposure to heat. Stones placed near the fire may crack or change appearance after repeated heating and cooling. When these features appear together, they suggest that people return to the same place again and again to maintain a flame. The existence of hearths indicates that fire had become part of the regular structure of human living spaces, rather than appearing briefly during a natural wildfire. Fire was kept alive within areas where people gathered, rested, and shared daily activities. Within these spaces, the presence of burned materials connected to food becomes especially interesting. Animal bones recovered near ancient hearths sometimes show signs of exposure to heat. Their surfaces may appear blackened, grey, or altered in ways that suggest they were placed near flames or embers. These changes happen because bone, like other organic materials, responds to temperature. As heat increases, the structure of the bone gradually transforms, leaving visible traces that can survive long after the original meal has vanished. Plant remains can also appear in altered forms. Seeds, fragments of wood, and other plant materials sometimes survive in a charred state. The process of charring removes much of the original organic content, but preserves the shape of the object in a carbonized form. Because of this, charred plant remains can endure in the soil for thousands of years, offering clues about what kinds of plants once existed near human settlements. When such materials are found close to hearth structures, they suggest that plants and fire interacted within the same space. Interpreting these traces requires caution. A burned bone does not automatically prove that the animal was cooked before being eaten. It might have fallen into the fire after the meal was finished. Likewise, a charred plant seed might have been part of fuel rather than food. Archaeologists therefore examine the broader pattern surrounding each discovery. When multiple lines of evidence appear together, hearth structures, repeated ash layers, burned bones, and charred plant remains, the combination suggests a regular relationship between fire and food within that site. Across many archaeological locations, this pattern begins to appear with increasing frequency as human history unfolds. Fires are maintained in central places within camps or settlements. Food remains appear close to these fires. The ground records repeated exposure to heat, indicating that flames were not temporary accidents, but ongoing features of daily life. These patterns do not provide a single moment when cooking began. Instead, they show a gradual shift in how humans interacted with fire and the materials they consumed. Fire becomes stable within the human environment, and food repeatedly appears in the same spaces where heat is strongest through these quiet traces preserved in soil and stone. Researchers can begin to imagine scenes from the distant past. People gather around a fire that has been kept alive through the night. Branches are added as the flames fade. The warmth spreads outward into the darkness, and objects placed near the heat slowly change under its influence. In these spaces where fire and food share the same ground, the possibility of cooking moves from accident to habit. If ancient campsites reveal that fire and food repeatedly came together in the same place, what might this suggest about how daily meals were gradually shaped by the steady presence of heat? The traces left behind in ancient campsites rarely show the full moment when a meal was prepared. Instead, they reveal patterns that repeat over long periods of time. Ash appears layered within the soil. Stones that once surrounded a flame remain clustered together. Animal bones and fragments of plants lie scattered nearby, sometimes marked by heat. Each individual trace is small, but together they suggest a relationship between fire and food that occurred again and again, within the same living spaces. When archaeologists examine these sites carefully, they often notice that hearths occupy central positions within the area where people once gathered. The fire was not placed randomly across the ground. It tended to appear in locations that allow the warmth and light to reach those sitting nearby. Around these central fires, objects connected to daily life accumulated. Stone tools used for cutting or scraping appear in the same areas. Broken bones from animals that were eaten can be found within the surrounding soil. Fragments of plant material sometimes remain in a charred state. These patterns hint at a setting in which food preparation, eating, and social gathering occurred within the same circle of warmth. The structure of a hearth also reveals something about the way fire was maintained. In some ancient sites, stones were arranged to hold embers in one place and prevent the flame from spreading across the ground. Layers of ash indicate that fires were rekindled many times, rather than appearing only once. This suggests that people returned to the same fire again and again, adding fuel and keeping the heat alive over extended periods. A fire that continues burning for many hours or days creates an environment where materials placed near it gradually change under warmth. Food left close to the flame does not remain in the same condition as when it was first gathered. The interaction between fire and food in these spaces may not have required deliberate planning in the earlier stages. If pieces of meat or plant material were set near the fire simply to keep them within reach, heat would still influence their structure. Fibers might loosen, moisture could evaporate, tissues might soften in the warmth of the embers. Over repeated encounters with these changes, early humans could begin to notice that food exposed to heat behaved differently when bitten or chewed. This observation would not necessarily appear as a sudden invention. It could emerge gradually through experience. The body senses differences in texture and effort. A piece of food that softens near the fire requires less force from the teeth. Materials that once resisted chewing may begin to separate more easily. Over time, the repeated presence of these differences could shape habits around the fire. Instead of leaving food at random distances from the flame, people might begin placing certain materials closer to the warmth where the softening effect was strongest. Archaeological evidence cannot always capture these exact moments of learning. What it does reveal is that fires and food repeatedly shared the same spaces within ancient human settlements. Burned bones appear where heat was maintained. Charred plant remains preserved near the same hearths where ash accumulated over time. These clues suggest that the transformation of food through heat gradually became part of the ordinary environment of human life. When fire is kept alive within a living space, it does more than warm the air or illuminate the night. It creates a place where materials change under the influence of heat. Food placed within that circle of warmth no longer remains entirely raw. Its structure begins to shift before the act of eating begins. Across many generations, this quiet interaction between fire and food could slowly become a consistent element of human behavior. As these habits formed around ancient hearths, the presence of cooking may have begun to influence not only the condition of food, but also the rhythms of the people gathered nearby. If meals were shaped by the steady warmth of fire, how might that have changed the way time was spent during the day and evening in early human communities? When food begins to change under heat, the consequences do not end with the meal itself. The time required to gather, chew, and digest food has always been one of the quiet forces shaping the rhythm of life for animals. In many species, large portions of the day are devoted to eating and processing raw materials. The act of feeding can stretch across hours as jaws grind, stomachs work, and digestive systems slowly transform complex structures into usable energy. This pattern is not unusual in the animal world. It is simply the cost of obtaining nourishment from food that arrives in its natural, unordered state. For early humans who lived in environments where food was gathered from plants or hunted from animals, the same demands would have been present. Tough plant fibers require time to chew. Animal tissues resist tearing and must be broken apart with repeated effort from the teeth. Once swallowed, digestion continues its slow chemical work. If meals consisted entirely of raw materials, a considerable portion of each day would likely have been dedicated to processing food inside the body. The presence of fire introduced a possibility that could gradually shift this balance. When heat softens the structures that surround nutrients, the physical effort required to chew and digest those foods may change. Plant tissues that have been warmed become easier to break apart. Fibers loosen, and the pressure required from the jaw may decrease. Animal tissues exposed to sustained heat may separate more readily than the same meat in its raw condition. These differences influence not only the texture of food, but also the time needed to process it. A meal that requires less force to chew may take less time to eat. Food that begins to break down under heat may move through the digestive system with slightly different efficiency than raw material that remains structurally intact. The digestive process still occurs, but its early stages have already begun before the food reaches the mouth. Over long periods of time, even modest changes in how food is processed can influence the rhythm of daily life. If chewing becomes easier and digestion begins with fewer structural barriers, the amount of time required to obtain usable energy from food may shift. This does not mean that early humans suddenly stopped spending time eating. Gathering and preparing food would still have required attention and effort. Yet, the balance between feeding and other activities could slowly adjust as the condition of food changed under heat. Fire itself may have contributed to this adjustment in another way. The presence of a hearth created a place where people gathered during the cooler hours of the evening. After a day of movement across the landscape in search of plants, animals, or other resources, returning to a fire provided warmth and visibility in the fading light. Within this space, food could be placed near the heat while people rested, spoke, or performed other small tasks. The fire became both a center of gathering and a place where food gradually softened. In this environment, the act of eating could become intertwined with the social and practical rhythms of life around the hearth. Instead of consuming food immediately upon gathering it, people might bring it back to the fire where heat slowly altered its texture. As these habits formed, the transformation of food through warmth may have begun to shape not only the body's relationship with digestion, but also the structure of daily time. Meals could occur within shared spaces, illuminated by fire rather than scattered across the landscape. The act of eating might unfold in moments of rest rather than in constant motion. If cooking allowed food to soften near the hearth while people gathered in its warmth, how might that steady presence of fire begin to influence the social life forming within the circle of light it created? When a fire burns steadily within a living space, it changes more than the condition of food. It also changes how people move through the hours of the day. In the natural world, many animals must search for food continually. Grazing species walk slowly across the landscape for long stretches of time, feeding as they go. Primates gather fruits and leaves while moving from tree to tree. Predators may rest between hunts. Yet, when food is available, they must devote attention to tearing, chewing, and digesting raw materials that resist quick consumption. The rhythm of life in such conditions often follows the availability and difficulty of food itself. For early human communities, the presence of fire created a different kind of place within the landscape. A hearth did not move across the ground as animals did while grazing. It remained in one location, producing warmth and light that extended outward into the surrounding darkness. People could return to this place repeatedly, knowing that heat and visibility would greet them there. Over time, the hearth became a point of stability within a world otherwise defined by movement and uncertainty. As people gathered around this steady source of warmth, the tasks of daily life could begin to unfold within its circle of light. Tools could be repaired or shaped while sitting near the fire. Objects collected during the day could be sorted and examined. Pieces of food could rest close to the heat where their textures slowly changed. These activities did not require constant movement through the landscape. Instead, they allowed people to remain together in a shared space for longer periods of time. In this setting, the relationship between food and time began to shift subtly. Raw food often demands immediate attention because chewing and digestion require sustained effort. When food is softened by heat near a fire, some of that effort may be reduced before eating begins. A root placed near embers may gradually lose its rigidity. Meat exposed to warmth may separate more easily under the pressure of teeth. These changes allow the act of eating to occur within moments of rest rather than during continuous movement. The fire therefore creates a place where both people and food can remain still while transformation takes place. Over long evenings beside the hearth,